Hello and welcome again to Microeconomics. Today we're going to talk about consumer behavior. That is, we're going to try and see if we can come up with an explanation of why consumers behave in the fashion that they do. Now, we've already gotten a glimpse of exactly how we expect them to behave. That was called the law of demand. Today we're going to talk a little bit about what is the theory that underpins the law of demand. Why is it that consumers behave in the fashion that they do? And remember that when we say consumers, we don't necessarily mean just individuals or people, because firms also are consumers. They're just consumers of resources instead. So we begin our discussion with the concept of utility. Utility is the ability of a good to satisfy a need or a want. Now, I remind you that when we talked about this before, we don't really separate needs from wants. It doesn't really matter to us as economists because we're really looking at motivations and behaviors. Notice that it is very subjective. That means that different individuals might have a need or a want that's more intense than others. In some cases, different individuals might have a need for something or a want for something that someone else would find they had no need or no want for. We're going to make the assumption that people have different taste and that tastes are relatively stable, that they don't change much through time. They do change through time, but not at a very quick rate. The result of that is we can look at utility, we can look at satisfaction in two different ways. We can look at it as a total, that is, if we consume multiple quantities, multiple units of a good or service, we can look at it in total, or we can do the economist way, we can look at it at the margin. And reminder that the word marginal simply means a change in the total. So if we were thinking about consuming a particular good, the example that we're going to use in a minute is consuming water after a run. We could think about it in terms of the total amount of satisfaction from all the glasses of water that we drank. Or we could think of it in terms of what is the additional satisfaction I get from one additional unit of the good or service. Now, the decision making is actually made at the margin. That's a very common phrase that you hear all the time in economics. When we're actually trying to predict how consumers are going to behave, we need to know what will they do next. And one of the most important ideas in all of economics is the idea that the more of a good you consume, the less each additional unit satisfies you. That is, as we consume more and more of a good, typically it does add to total utility, but each additional unit does not add as much as we get more and more. And in fact, we actually could end up having a disutility. That is, we could end up in a position where we actually have a negative marginal utility. And we'll see an example of that in a second. Notice that we really don't have any way of measuring utility or satisfaction. We could ask people and say on a scale from 1 to 10 how satisfactory was that, but in fact we don't have a meter to directly measure it, so we have to rely on what people tell us. So here is a consumption function in which if someone's just come back from jogging, they're considering consuming water in order to get over their thirst. When they consume 0 8-ounce glasses of water, their total utility is 0. When they consume 1, the total utility, the total satisfaction is 40. When they consume 2, the total satisfaction is 60. And so we see that the first through the fourth glasses actually add to the total amount of satisfaction that they receive as a result of consuming the good. However, notice that as they consume more and more of the good, the additional satisfaction, that is the marginal utility, actually declines. So the first glass is the best. The first glass does the best job of satisfying your thirst. The second glass, not quite as much. The third glass, not quite as much. The the fourth glass, not quite as much. And in fact, by the fifth glass, it actually has a disutility or a negative marginal utility. That is, it actually subtracts from your level of satisfaction. So if we were to graph that out, it would look something like this. That is, we see in the blue graph up at the top, that's the total utility, and you can see that the total utility increases all the way through the fourth unit, but by the fifth unit actually causes it to drop off, so the total utility actually falls. On the bottom graph, you can see that the marginal utility is doing exactly what we said. That is, the first unit has higher marginal utility than the second has higher than the third, and by the fifth, we're actually getting a negative marginal utility. Now, if the good was free, that is, if we didn't have to pay for it at all, we would consume the good as long as the marginal utility is positive. In our case, we'd consume 4 glasses of water. On the other hand, if we had 2 free goods, that is, we had a choice, say, between free water or free Gatorade, we would consume free Gatorade until it no longer had a positive marginal utility, and then we would consume water until it no longer had a positive marginal utility. The order of that, of course, would depend on our taste and preferences. Some people might prefer drinking the water first and then the Gatorade. On the other hand, some people might prefer the Gatorade first and then the water. However, we know that for most goods, they're not free. So when they're not free, how do we go about doing it? Well, we do what is known as maximize utility. We're looking for a consumer equilibrium. And that's a point at which there's no way to increase our utility given the income that we have. Given the budget that we have, there's no way to be any better off. And we will do that by consuming to the point where the marginal utility divided by the price of each of the products is exactly equal. In this case, we could extend this formula to as many products as we had. In this case, we're going to look at the marginal utility of pizza divided by the price of pizza is equal to the marginal utility of videos divided by the price of videos. In this case, we're actually going to look at an example where we're looking at pizzas and videos and how would we choose between them. We want to allocate our budget in such a fashion that the last dollar spent on each good yields the same amount of marginal utility per dollar. Now, what that means, of course, is that higher priced goods, since the price goes in the denominator, are going to have to return us higher marginal utility, otherwise we're not going to like them. And lower priced goods, since the price is in the denominator, can get by with much lower utility levels. And so this explains why it is that you buy things that aren't terribly expensive more frequently than things that are terribly expensive. So here's a case in which we're fixing to invite some friends over. We have $40 to spend. We're trying to determine how many pizzas and how many videos to rent. And each pizza costs $8. Each video costs $4. We have here in column 2 the total utility for various different levels. And so you can see that if we're looking at pizza, the first pizza gives us 56 units of utility, the second 88 units, then 112, 130, 142, and 150. However, the important thing for decision making is what is the additional pizza contributing. And you see that the first one contributes 56, the second one contributes an additional 32, the third one contributes an additional 24, and so forth on down. We've got the same thing over here for videos, and so the total utility for the first video is 40, then 68, then 88, then 100, 108, 114. The addition of the first video is an additional 40 units of satisfaction. The additional second video is 28 units, 20 units, 12 units, 8 units, and 6. Now, if you look at these numbers, one of the things that you see immediately is that these numbers are smaller than the ones in column 3. But you also notice that video rentals are less expensive than our pizzas. If they weren't, if they were the same price, then it's unlikely you'd get much in the way of video rentals, because what we're interested in is the marginal utility per dollar. So we simply take this number and divide it by 8, and it gives us this number. This number divided by 8 gives us this number. Over here, we take the marginal utility and divide it by the price of 4, and then the marginal utility divided by a price of 4, and so forth. Now, our way of choosing is we're going to choose the highest marginal utility per dollar. In determining, do we want to buy pizza first or do we want to buy videos first, we simply look to see which one gives us the most satisfaction per dollar. And the first thing we're going to want to buy is a video, because it gives us 10 units of satisfaction per dollar. The first pizza only gives us 7 units of satisfaction per dollar. So the first thing we'd buy is one video, and then we would buy one pizza and one video, and then we would buy an additional video, and we would continue with this process. That is, we would compare how much are we going to enjoy this per dollar until we exhausted all of our money. And if we do that, what we'll determine is that for $40 we'll buy 3 pizzas and 4 videos, and that will exhaust our $40 and give us what we need in order to have the party. Now, the natural next question is, what happens if the prices change? And suppose we change the price of pizza from $8 to $6. Now, if we do that, notice the marginal utility does not change. In other words, pizzas are still as satisfactory as they were before. But the marginal utility per dollar does change. That is, now we're taking column 3 and dividing it by $6 instead of dividing it by $8. And so the result of that is we get a new column 4. We'll use the same process again. That is, we'll compare the marginal utility per dollar for each additional purchase that we want to make until we exhaust our $40, but we'll end up with a brand new blend of products. Because remember, before we chose 2 videos before we ever got a pizza. Well, now we'll choose a video, and then we'll choose a pizza, and then we'll choose a video, and then we'll choose a pizza, because now this column is greater than it was before. Remember, we're taking the marginal utility and dividing it by the price. In this case, the price has fallen, so the numbers in column 4 are going to be higher than they were before. So the result is, when the price is equal to $8, we'll end up with 4 videos and 3 pizzas. But once the price of pizza drops to $6, we'll end up with 4 videos and 4 pizzas. That is, a drop in price of pizza from $8 to $6 ended up with us buying additional pizzas. So what we've been successful in doing is actually generating a demand curve. Because remember, when we talked about a demand curve and a demand schedule, we said that the law of demand says that as price falls, the quantity demanded increases. Well, that's exactly what happened with us. We had a change in price from $8 to $6, and we went from buying 3 pizzas to buying 4 pizzas. And this is a direct result, really, of a change in marginal utility per dollar. As we lowered the price, it made the pizzas more attractive than they were before. And so the marginal utility per dollar actually went up, and so we wanted more of them. Truth of the matter is, once we agree to the law of diminishing marginal utility, we're automatically going to get a downward sloping demand curve. Now, that leads us to an important idea, and that is the idea of consumer surplus. As a result of this, one of the things that we discover is that some of the goods that we purchased along the way, we actually got some extra value. We actually got more utility per dollar than we ended up having to pay. We got a marginal valuation or an additional enjoyment above the price that we had to pay for. And this is known as consumer surplus. It's a kind of a bonus. It's some extra utility because we only pay a single price for things. It's the additional satisfaction that we got as the result of paying in a particular price. Here we have sub sandwiches, and suppose the price for the sub is $4. By looking at this demand curve, we see that for the very first sub, we would have been willing to have paid $7 for that one. It was worth $7 to us because the marginal utility of the first sub is higher than the others. And so this distance here, this difference here between the $4 and the $7 is consumer surplus. It's extra satisfaction that we got as the result of only having to pay a single price. Same thing happens, although not as strongly, on the second one. On the second one, it would have been worth $6 to us, but we only had to pay $4, so we got $2 worth of extra satisfaction out of that one. On number 3, we would have been willing to pay $5 for it, but we only had to pay $4 for it, so the result of that was we got $1 worth. So if you add up this entire triangle, that is from the price across to the demand curve, from the price across to the demand curve and up to here, this triangle, this is known as consumer surplus. It's additional extra satisfaction that we get as a result of only having to pay a set price for these. Now, you can do the same thing for consumers in general. That is, if we look at what the market demand curve looks like, it's made up of a summation of various different individual demand curves. In other words, each individual who's a participant in the market has their own demand curve. We add all of those together and we end up with the market demand curve. Now, since each one of these consumers has their own individual consumer surplus, the result is we have a sort of a societal consumer surplus. So here we have your demand curve, which we've just seen, plus Brittany's demand curve, plus Chris's demand curve. We add them all together, and the result is the market demand curve, which is just the combination of these three put together. Since the price is $4, this entire area, this, once again, triangle, is a measure of the consumer surplus, the additional satisfaction that the three of us get as a result of a single price. It's also known as welfare, and in this case, welfare doesn't mean what it does in the political realm. It's the additional welfare or additional satisfaction that the members of society receive as a result of a single price for the good or service. Now, this is an important concept for us because one of the things that we're going to want to measure later on is, has some of this consumer surplus, has some of this extra satisfaction been taken away from us as a result of some problem in the market? And you can see that that would drop if the price was to rise to $5. The triangle would get smaller then, and so the result is the welfare of society as a whole would go down. On the other hand, if we can find ways of moving the price down, that is from $4 to $3, then the triangle gets larger. And so as a result, society in general is better off, or we're getting more for our money, or more extra or bonus satisfaction for our money. And so the idea of consumer surplus is going to show back up for us from time to time as we see how price gets affected and how the behavior of people gets affected by conditions within the market. Well, that's all for this time. We'll see you again next time when we'll begin to look at the other side of the market.